Chapter 1. The Bloom That Should Not Be. The garden party at Ravenwell House was an affair of tasteful opulence, the kind where conversation mingled with the soft strains of a string quartet and the scent of freshly baked scones. Set among the rolling hills of Wiltshire, the estate had long belonged to the Langford family, once known for political influence, now known more for their eccentric gatherings. On this particular July afternoon, Lady Helena Langford had spared no detail. The silver service gleamed, the staff moved with choreographed precision, and the guests a blend of minor aristocracy, society journalists and art patrons, drifted through the gardens in linen and lace. It was meant to be a celebration, the opening of the estate's newly restored Orchid house, a project dear to Lady Helena's heart, and funded largely through the estate's sale of rare heirlooms. The event had already been covered in the Tatler, and would soon appear in the Times. But by late afternoon, a subtle tension had begun to settle over the guests, because nestled among the pristine white and blushing pink orchids, at the centre of the glass house was a black orchid, a flower no one remembered planting, and beside the strange velvet-petalled bloom lay the body of Sir Montague Langford. He had been found by the gardener's apprentice, face down beneath a fallen potting shelf. The scene appeared accidental: broken glass, spilled soil, and the shattered remains of a watering can. But something about it, something too composed, too deliberate, unnerved everyone present. Lady Helena had been quickly led away. The party had ended in murmurs and shuffled feet, and the estate steward, a pinched man named Hargrove, had been dispatched to send a discreet telegram. The addressee, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. 3 days later, a black car wound up the gravel drive of Ravenwell House. The sky was the same shade as wet slate, and the clouds hung low, as if unwilling to part with their secrets. Hercule Poirot stepped out with precise care, dusted an invisible speck from the lapel of his grey suit, and surveyed the manor with narrowed eyes. At his side, Captain Hastings, freshly returned from Scotland, followed with 2 suitcases and a puzzled frown. "I must say, Poirot, I can't quite see why they've called you in. The whole thing sounds rather straightforward. A toppled shelf in a greenhouse?" Poirot did not respond at once. He walked slowly toward the steps, his gaze taking in the well-tended hedges, the gravel drive, the symmetry of the entryway. "Mon ami," he said at last, "when a man dies among flowers, it is always curious. When a wealthy baronet dies beneath a flower that no one remembers placing, it is more than curious. It is, how do you say, disturbing. But the local doctor said it was a concussion, yes? Head trauma from the fall?" "Indeed," said Poirot. And yet Sir Montague Langford was not the sort of man to potter in the Orchid house, nor was he known for gardening at all. "And did you read the coroner's preliminary note?" Hastings blinked. "No." Poirot paused. "It mentioned how odd that his boots were spotless, not a trace of soil." "Which suggests he hadn't been walking about the greenhouse," Hastings said slowly. "Just so. He entered, he died, but he left no trace of having walked there." Hastings frowned. "And the orchid?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, the black orchid, a flower not found in this climate. Not naturally. Not in England, which means someone went to great lengths to obtain it, and place it exactly where it would be noticed. They entered the house. Inside, the parlour was dark and cool, with thick drapes drawn against the light. Lady Helena stood to greet them, slender, composed, her mourning veil pinned in place with understated pearls. Her voice was low, clipped, but steady. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. I only hope you can help make sense of this madness. He was not a beloved man, but he didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." Poirot inclined his head. "Please, Lady Helena, tell me everything, from the moment the guests arrived to the moment your husband was found." She hesitated, then glanced at Hastings. He is my most trusted companion," Poirot said, "and a loyal chronicler of truth." With a nod, she began. There were 17 guests that day. 12 had arrived before noon. Among them, a botanist, an art critic, a cousin from the north, a former flame, a financier, and a neighbour recently returned from the West Indies. Sir Montague had arrived late to the garden party, complaining of headaches and insisting on solitude. "I never saw him go into the Orchid house," Lady Helena said, her voice thinner now. "He wasn't meant to be there at all, and yet there he was." Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me, madame, who had access to the greenhouse keys?" She hesitated. "Only myself, the gardener, and Monty. But the key was not missing. It was in the door." Poirot's eyes flicked upward. "Curious," he said softly. "And who else, Lady Helena, would benefit from your husband's death?" Her hands fluttered slightly. I can't say. He had business enemies, old resentments. He was not a kind man, Monsieur Poirot, but no one would kill him over orchids." Poirot stood slowly. "That, Lady Helena, remains to be seen." He turned to Hastings with a gleam in his eye. "Come, mon ami, let us examine the glass house." And as the doors closed behind them, the air seemed to shift. The real investigation had begun. Beneath the elegant surfaces of Ravenwell House, Hercule Poirot had already sensed it. Envy, fear, bitterness, and somewhere in the heart of that tangled garden, a killer who had left a flower in place of a signature. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The Orchid. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The Orchid house at Ravenwell stood in the far corner of the estate gardens, an elegant glass-paned structure framed by ivy-covered trellises and aged flagstone paths. On the afternoon of Sir Montague Langford's death, it had been the jewel of Lady Helena's carefully curated world. Now it was cordoned off with a velvet rope, guarded by a sign in bold handwriting, "Temporarily closed." Poirot stepped over the rope delicately, his polished shoes making the faintest crunch on the gravel. Hastings followed, trying not to look too conspicuous, though it was difficult not to feel like a trespasser in the hushed solemnity of the place. Inside, the Orchid house was warm and damp, as if the flowers had been mourning in their own slow, humid silence. Tiered shelves rose along the walls, bursting with lush greenery and delicate blooms of every imaginable color, except, of course, for the singular black orchid, now removed and stored under lock at Poirot's request. But Poirot's attention was not on the flowers. He examined the floor tiles. They were scrubbed clean now, but here and there the faintest smear of soil lingered in the grout lines. He crouched beside the metal bench where Sir Montague had been found. The shelving unit that had fallen lay carefully propped in the corner. "Too clean," he murmured. "No dried watermarks, no scattered tools." "You're suggesting the scene was arranged?" Hastings asked. "Nature is chaotic, mon ami. Accidents, too. This was tidy." They returned to the manor to find that the drawing-room had been prepared, as per Poirot's request. Comfortable chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, tea laid out discreetly by the housekeeper, and the suspects, though they would not yet call themselves that, had been gathered. Poirot stood at the hearth, arms folded, scanning them one by one. Seated closest to the fire was Dr. Malcolm Rivington, a renowned botanist and guest of honor at the garden party. A tall man in his late 50s, with restless fingers and eyes that flicked constantly toward the window. He had arrived from Kew Gardens the day before the incident, at Lady Helena's invitation, and had spoken at length about rare species and conservation efforts. He was also, Hastings recalled, the first to express open surprise at the sight of the black orchid. Next to him sat Verity Langford, Montague's niece and sole surviving relative outside the marriage, a striking woman in her 30s, with auburn hair swept back severely from her face. She wore mourning black, but there was something defiant in her posture, an air of practiced self-control, honed perhaps from years of being overlooked in a family not her own. She had spent the past 2 years abroad, studying at an art institute in Florence, and had only recently returned to England. Beside Verity was Mr. Lionel Trent, Sir Montague's financial adviser. He was a neat, compact man, with rimless spectacles and a voice so bland it was almost impossible to recall what he had said 5 minutes after he said it. He had advised the Langfords on the sale of several family holdings, and was rumoured to have urged the recent sale of heirloom paintings. In the armchair near the window, legs crossed and smiling faintly, sat Mrs. Clarissa Vale, a novelist of minor but persistent reputation. Once a close companion of Lady Helena's in London society, she now maintained a country home not far from Ravenwell. Clarissa had been heard to describe Sir Montague as delightfully ghastly. Her presence at the party had surprised no one, and delighted a few. Poirot suspected she heard and remembered more than she let on. Standing slightly apart from the group, his hands awkwardly clasped, was Anthony Blakemore, the gardener's assistant, the very man who had discovered the body. He was young, no older than 22, with a mop of unkempt hair and nervous energy that had yet to settle. He had been hired just 3 months earlier, a recommendation from a local vicar. Lady Helena entered last, pale but composed, and took a seat beside Clarissa without a word. Poirot cleared his throat. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for agreeing to gather. I do not do this for spectacle, I assure you, but it is my custom, when investigating a matter of death that wears the mask of accident, to learn more about the living." There were a few uncomfortable glances, but no interruptions. Poirot gestured lightly. "Each of you was present on the day Sir Montague Langford died. Each of you had proximity to the Orchid house, and more importantly, each of you had cause to be, how shall I say, concerned about the future of Ravenwell." Lionel Trent cleared his throat. "With respect, Monsieur Poirot, are you suggesting that one of us suggests nothing? I observe, I inquire, and in time I deduce." He turned to Dr. Rivington. You, monsieur, were perhaps the only one who truly appreciated the significance of the black orchid. What can you tell us of it? The botanist pushed his spectacles higher. It's not a species native to the region. It is extraordinarily rare, and even more extraordinary to find it blooming. In fact, I doubt it could be cultivated here without very precise conditions, which is why I was astonished to see it. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet, no one claims to have planted it. Rivington hesitated. No, that's what struck me as strange. It wasn't on Lady Helena's planting schedule. She showed me the list herself. It had no label. It was simply there. Poirot turned next to Verity. You returned from Florence a fortnight ago, mademoiselle. Did you visit the greenhouse? No, Verity said calmly. I've no interest in orchids. I preferred the drawing-room. Her tone was dry, closer to the wine. Did you see your uncle often? I avoided him when possible. Clarissa gave a faint, amused snort. Poirot let the response hang a moment before moving on. Mr. Trent, did you ever advise... Response hang a moment before moving on. Mr. Trent, did you ever advise Sir Montague on botanical matters? No, said Trent, blinking. I handled financial matters. The sale of the silver, the Brancusi sketch. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Ah, a sketch by Brancusi. I did not know the Langfords owned one. They didn't, Verity said flatly. It was forged. My uncle paid a forger in Milan, then used it as leverage to inflate the estate's value. Trent facilitated the sale. I was not aware of its dubious origin, Trent said quickly, though sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. Poirot turned to Mrs. Vale. Madam, you knew the family well. Were there tensions that might not have been visible to outsiders? Clarissa smiled thinly. Tensions? Ravenwell was built on tensions. Monty thought everyone owed him. Helena thought she could save him. And Verity, she glanced sideways, wanted only to survive him. Poirot nodded once, then looked to the gardener's assistant. You found the body? Anthony Blakemore swallowed. Yes, sir. What were you doing there? Watering. I finished early and was sweeping the floor near the far bench. I heard a crash. When I turned the corner, he was already down. Was anyone else there? No, sir. Not that I saw. Poirot tilted his head. Did you touch anything? The boy shook his head. No, I ran for help. Poirot folded his hands. Thank you. That is all for now. But I will speak with each of you again, individually. Truth, you see, does not always bloom when watched by a crowd. As the suspects filed out, Poirot turned to Hastings with a look of mild amusement. So many flowers, he said, so many different scents, and yet one is artificial. Hastings blinked. You mean one of them is lying? Poirot gave a small shrug. Mais oui. But the question, my friend, is not who planted the orchid. He looked back toward the empty chair where Verity had sat. It is why they wanted it to bloom exactly when it did. Chapter 3. The Initial Interviews. After the formal gathering in the drawing-room, Poirot wasted no time. His manner, while always polished, grew tighter, more precise. The suspects had now taken on distinct outlines in his mind, each one a potential architect of deception, each one wearing their grief or innocence like a chosen costume. Lady Helena offered the library for his interviews. Poirot insisted on using the sunroom instead. "There is something," he murmured to Hastings as they entered, "about bright light and clarity of mind. People are more likely to reveal themselves where there are no shadows." Hastings, notebook in hand, took a chair near the window. Poirot sat at a small table facing the room, and Lady Helena, ever the efficient hostess, sent the first guest promptly. Dr. Malcolm Rivington. The botanist stepped into the sunroom with an air of composed irritation, as though he had postponed something of far greater scientific importance for this conversation. His tall frame seemed almost out of place against the delicate furnishings, but his eyes were sharp. "You wish to speak further, Monsieur Poirot?" "If you please," said Poirot. "You knew Sir Montague from before the garden party?" "Barely," Rivington replied. "I had exchanged letters with Lady Helena regarding the greenhouse renovation. She was particularly interested in rare species, more sentimental than scientific, but passionate nonetheless." "And the black orchid? It does not belong here. Period. The Paphiopedilum midnight shadow, if that's truly what it is, requires a very specific high-altitude environment and a temperature far too consistent for an English summer. I was astonished to see it thriving. Unless, of course—" He hesitated. Poirot waited. "Unless it had been forced to bloom early. Artificially. It can be done with hormonal sprays, but only someone with knowledge and access could manage it without killing the plant. And such a person." Rivington lifted his chin slightly. "Me? Or someone copying me?" Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, doctor. One final question. Did you like Sir Montague?" The botanist allowed himself a smile. He once referred to orchids as tulips with ambitions. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I did not like him, but I did not kill him. Verity Langford." Verity entered next, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed. "Let's be clear, Monsieur Poirot," she said as she sat. "I had no reason to mourn my uncle. He disinherited me 5 years ago. His death was no tragedy." "Disinherited you?" Hastings asked, surprised. "Entirely. He called me frivolous, said I lacked Weatherby sense, whatever that meant." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Yet you returned to Ravenwell." "For my aunt," Verity said, "and perhaps for closure." "You did not visit the orchid house?" "No. And yet the glass-house path shows signs of heels, not flat garden shoes, and a heel print matching your size." She blinked. "I may have passed by. That's not a crime." "No," said Poirot gently, "but it is a contradiction." Verity stood. "I didn't kill him. I only wish he'd stayed out of my life years ago." Poirot remained still as she left. Behind him, Hastings muttered, "She's hiding something." Poirot nodded. "But not necessarily a crime." Lionel Trent arrived next, carrying a briefcase and an oily calmness. "You've been advising the Langfords for how long?" Poirot asked. 4 years, Trent replied. "I was hired after Sir Montague's disastrous venture into Cuban sugar. Lost nearly 40% of the estate's liquidity. I was brought in to stabilize, and in doing so, recommended the sale of valuables. The estate was hemorrhaging money. Selling 1 or 2 heirlooms was the only reasonable option." Poirot's voice softened. Tell me, monsieur, was the Poirot's voice softened. Tell me, monsieur, was the Brancusi sketch your idea? Trent's smile twitched. It was his. Sir Montague had connections in Italy. I merely oversaw the transfer. Yet it was revealed to be a forgery. After the sale, Poirot gave him a long, quiet look. Tell me, Mr. Trent, was Sir Montague planning to name a new heir? Trent blinked. I wouldn't know, but you would benefit if the estate passed into legal limbo, would you not? Executors' fees, administrative holdovers, a slow bleed of capital? Trent's jaw tensed. That's quite a suggestion, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot smiled mildly. Then perhaps it is simply a question. Clarissa Vale Clarissa swept in next like a woman arriving at a dinner party, her pearl earrings swinging and her perfume lingering in the air. I do hope this won't be dull, she said, settling herself. I very much doubt that, madam, Poirot replied. Tell me, did you know Sir Montague well? Biblically, no. Socially, too well. He once proposed to me in 1923, and again in 28. The second time I was married. And you declined, of course. He wanted obedience. I prefer fiction. Poirot smiled. Did he ever confide in you? Clarissa's eyes sharpened. Only once. A week before the party, I received a note. He wrote, Clarissa, I have found something that changes everything. Come see. He signed it with his initials. Did you? I did not. Why not? Because I don't chase ghosts, Monsieur Poirot, even when they bloom like orchids. Anthony Blakemore, the final guest, was the gardener's assistant. He wrung his cap in his hands as he sat. You were watering the orchids when Sir Montague died? Yes, sir. Did he say anything to you? Anthony shook his head. Didn't see him till he was down. I heard a noise, a sort of crack, then a crash. And you touched nothing? No, sir. Ran to fetch Lady Helena. Poirot leaned forward. Did you see the black orchid before the body was found? Anthony hesitated. I saw it 2 days before. But it wasn't in bloom, just green. It opened the morning of the party. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Thank you. When the boy left, Hastings stood, pacing. Well, they all had motive. Verity for revenge, Trent for profit, Rivington for reputation, Clarissa for spite, and the boy, well, perhaps he was bribed. Poirot stood slowly, brushing lint from his cuff. Yes, Hastings, but the orchid bloomed on schedule. Someone timed it. Someone wanted the bloom to coincide with the party, with the discovery. That is not spontaneous. That is staged. And the killer? Poirot looked toward the orchid house. The killer is not the one who planted the flower, Hastings. The do is the one who understood what it would mean, and needed the world to see it bloom precisely when it did. Chapter 4. The First False Lead. The following morning brought an unwelcome visitor to Ravenwell House. Not a person, but a notion. The notion that the case had already been solved. At breakfast, Poirot found himself seated opposite Inspector Jarrell of the Wiltshire Constabulary, a stout moustached man with the unmistakable air of someone eager to wrap matters up before lunch. I appreciate you coming all the way from London, Monsieur Poirot, he said, buttering a scone with unnecessary vigour. But I dare say we've got this matter well in hand. Poirot sipped his coffee. Indeed. Oh, yes, a tidy little confession, if not quite in words. The gardener's boy, Anthony Blakemore. I've just had a word with the local chemist. The boy purchased a bottle of ethereal solution 2 weeks ago. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Ethereal? Plant hormone, Jorel said triumphantly. Used to induce flowering. Very specific, very rare, but quite effective, especially with temperamental orchids. Poirot said nothing. We searched the gardener's shed this morning, the inspector went on. Found a small vial, half used, label removed, but the chemist identified the handwriting on the purchase order. And that, Poirot murmured, is your proof. He had access, opportunity, and no alibi for the hour prior to the death. Not to mention he was the one who found the body. Always a suspicious detail. Poirot stirred his coffee slowly. And the motive? Gerald leaned forward with satisfaction. Money. We believe Sir Montague caught him stealing rare plants. The boy's record is clean on the surface, but I've requested files from Salisbury. He was dismissed from a former position under ambiguous circumstances. The Langfords may not have known. Blakemore's stages a confrontation, perhaps pushes the old man. It goes wrong, and well, you see where it leads. Poirot set down his spoon. I see where you wish it to lead, Inspector, he said softly. But murder, true murder, is not simply the presence of motive and means. It is the necessity of silencing someone. It is premeditation, not panic. Gerald frowned. You think it's too tidy? I think, said Poirot, that you are pruning the case before the weeds have finished growing. Poirot found Hastings pacing in the lower garden, frowning into the hedges. They're going to arrest the boy, aren't they? He said, without preamble. Unless we intervene, we. But the hormone, ethereal, what else could it mean? That someone wanted the orchid to bloom, Poirot said. Not necessarily why Sir Montague died. He crouched beside the path, studying a row of footprints in the softened earth. Gardening boots, yes, but one set larger than Anthony's. Do you recall, he said, rising, what Clarissa Vale told us? That Sir Montague sent her a note a week prior. I have found something that changes everything. Yes, you don't think it was the orchid? No, Hastings. It was not the flower itself. It was the meaning behind it. He paused. Come, let us. It was the meaning behind it. He paused. Come, let us speak to Lady Helena. They found her in the gallery room, standing before a portrait of her late husband, a formal oil painting in full, hunting regalia, hound at his side, and a faint expression of disdain etched into his features. Lady Helena, Poirot began gently, we are told your husband rarely entered the greenhouse, and yet, on the day of the party, he was found there. She turned composed but pale. Yes. Did you see him that morning? Her eyes flickered. Briefly. He was in his study. I brought him tea. Did he seem agitated? No. Distant. Lost in thought. Did he say where he was going? No, but I assumed he was preparing for one of his evasions. He often disappeared during our gatherings. Poirot stepped closer. Madame, I must ask, did your husband keep any private ledgers or documents? Diaries? She hesitated. There was a safe, she said at last, behind the bookshelf in his study. I've not opened it since the accident. May we? She nodded. With Lady Helena's permission, Poirot examined the safe. Inside, among bundles of estate documents and a revolver untouched in years, he found a brown folder marked Orchid's Inheritance. Within it was a series of notes and photographs, botanical studies, financial graphs, and at the center, a birth certificate. Hastings leaned over his shoulder. Arthur Elias Weatherby, born 1902. But who is he? Poirot closed the folder with quiet care. A scandal, hidden for decades. An illegitimate child, more than that. A rival claimant to the Weatherby estate, which, as you know, passed through Lady Helena to Sir Montague only by default after the elder line expired. You think Montague found this? I do. And I believe the black orchid was not just a botanical marvel. It was a message. A rare flower used to mark rare blood. Someone wanted Montague to understand that the estate, the name, the wealth, might belong elsewhere. Hastings drew back. So the orchid was planted as a threat. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or a warning. And perhaps he planned to reveal the truth, at the garden party no less. So someone silenced him to stop that reveal his actor. That evening, as Inspector Gerell prepared the papers for Anthony Blakemore's arrest, Poirot requested a final interview with the boy. They sat again in the sunroom. Anthony looked more composed than expected. "I know what they're saying," he said, "that I used something to force the orchid to bloom. But I didn't kill him, sir. I swear it." Poirot leaned forward. "Anthony, where did you get the ethereal?" "I bought it for Lady Helena's roses," he said. "She asked for something to stimulate blooming early. I didn't even use it on the orchids. I tried once, but Dr. Rivington said it would harm them." Poirot nodded. "And did you ever see Sir Montague enter the orchid house before that day?" "Once, a week before. He was carrying papers." Poirot paused. "Did you hear him speak?" The boy hesitated. He was muttering something about a name. A rightful name. Said, "They won't take this from me." Poirot sat back. "Merci, mon garçon. That is all I needed to hear." As the boy left, Hastings looked to him. "You believe him?" "I do," Poirot said simply, "because his lie was too small. But the truth, Hastings, the truth is always precise and deadly." He turned to the window, where the last rays of sunlight struck the trellised glass of the orchid house. The murderer planted the black orchid not to start a murder, but to stop an inheritance. Chapter 5. The Psychological Game. The morning after the failed arrest of Anthony Blakemore, Ravenwell House felt different, not quieter. Silence had always been its preferred language, but watchful. The staff moved with more care. The air seemed tense, as if the house itself had begun to hold its breath. Hercule Poirot, however, was in no hurry. He took breakfast precisely at 8:30. Toast lightly buttered, eggs soft-boiled for 4 minutes, and coffee brewed just shy of boiling, a ritual that settled him. For the day ahead, he would not rely on inquiries or evidence, but on character. "Murder, Hastings," he said as they strolled the long hall past ancestral portraits, "is rarely committed by a stranger. It is committed by one who knows the pressure points, the secret fears, the weaknesses that lie beneath appearances." "You think someone is beginning to crack?" "No, my friend. I think someone believes they've won. that the arrest of the gardener was the end, and so it is time to press upon them, not with accusation, but with observation. Poirot began with Dr. Rivington, who had returned to the high Orchid house with permission, tending to the surviving specimens with the care of a parent nursing an ailing child. Poirot approached slowly, stopping near the bench where Montague's body had been found. "You are gentle with them," Poirot said. "They've suffered enough." Rivington replied curtly, "This whole affair has brought unnecessary attention to the collection. These plants thrive in obscurity." Poirot nodded, his eyes wandering. And yet it was attention someone sought, enough to make a flower bloom unnaturally. What would it take to force a rare orchid to flower days, weeks before its time? Rivington paused. Expertise or recklessness? Poirot tilted his head. "And which would you say you are, Doctor?" Rivington straightened. "That depends on the company." Poirot gave a thin smile. "Do you know, I wonder whether Sir Montague had planned to fund a conservation project at Kew?" There was a flicker in Rivington's eyes. "He mentioned something unofficially. There were drafts. He was intrigued by the politics of orchids, how easily they can change hands, how a single specimen can shift value between entire estates." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "Politics of orchids and inheritance. Curious overlap, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot left him in silence. Later that morning, Poirot requested that Verity join him for a walk in the South Gardens. She was reluctant, but accepted. Her gloved hands remained clasped in front of her the entire time. "Tell me, mademoiselle," Poirot said mildly, "what do you think your uncle was like, truly?" She glanced sideways at him. "Manipulative, controlling, vain." "And yet you returned for my aunt?" Poirot nodded. "But also for something else. You were disinherited, yet you came back precisely when Sir Montague had begun speaking of rectifying things." She stopped. "What do you mean?" "His documents suggest he had been investigating a lost heir. But what if he meant to restore you?" Verity's face remained still. "That would be unexpected, not unwanted." She met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "Justice isn't the same as kindness, Monsieur Poirot. If he wanted to give me back what he stole, it wouldn't make him a better man, just a tired one." "Ah," Poirot said, "but even tired men can be dangerous to those who depend upon their silence." He walked on without her, leaving her frowning by the roses. At noon, Poirot joined Clarissa Vale in the drawing-room, where she sat writing in a notebook beside the fire. "May I?" he asked, motioning to the armchair opposite. "You'll only distract me. That is the intention," he said brightly. "I thought we might talk of fiction." She arched a brow. "You're not writing a novel now, are you?" "No, madame." "But someone is." "A narrative, yes, but not with pages, with impressions, with evidence misarranged. Someone in this house is crafting a version of events, a fiction meant to lead the reader to the wrong conclusion." "Most mysteries do," she said dryly, "until the end." Poirot smiled. "And if I told you that I believe this particular story was planted like a seed, weeks in advance, that a flower was chosen to bloom on the day of the party to draw everyone's eye, so the real deception might go unnoticed, I'd say," Clarissa said, closing her notebook, "that you found your killer." "No, madam, I have found their pattern. But the killer, they are yet to reveal themselves." Clarissa tilted her head. "And how do you plan to make them do that?" Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs. "With care, with order, with, what is the phrase, a stage upon which they will perform." That evening, Poirot arranged a private dinner. Not a dramatic gathering, not yet, but just enough of an occasion to make his suspects uneasy. He had the seating arranged very specifically, Rivington across from Verity, Trent beside Clarissa, Lady Helena between Poirot and Hastings. Conversation was light at first. Poirot let it meander. He listened, and then, when dessert arrived, he struck. "Occurs to me," he said, spooning a modest portion of plum pudding, "that the black orchid is not the rarest thing at Ravenwell." "Oh?" Lady Helena asked, clearly thrown. "No, the rarest thing is what it represents. Legacy, ownership, the threat of a name returning that no one expected." Verity stiffened. Poirot continued, "And when one learns that the land beneath one's feet may belong to another, why, the temptation to prune the family tree becomes very great." There was a fragile pause. Then Trent chuckled weakly. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, I believe you enjoy this far too much." Poirot met his gaze. "I do not enjoy murder, monsieur, but I find it most instructive, especially when it is concealed within cleverness." No one spoke. He set down his spoon with delicate finality. "The person who killed Sir Montague did not do so in panic. It was not impulse, it was design. They knew the bloom, schedule, they knew the greenhouse habits. They even understood that planting a rare orchid would distract from the true event. A man silenced before he could alter a legacy." Poirot stood. "And so I shall do what I always do, mes amis. I shall gather you all once more tomorrow evening, and I shall reveal the story not as it was told, but as it truly unfolded." He bowed slightly, turned on his heel, and departed the room. Behind him, 5 faces remained frozen, each of them wondering, calculating, dreading, and the truth at last began to bloom. Chapter 6. A Second Bloom. The storm came just after midnight. Thunder rolled low across the moors, and rain lashed against the high windows of Ravenwell House with a fury that had not been forecast. Somewhere in the west wing, a window shutter banged open and closed like a warning. The household had long since retired, but the old manor felt restive, each creaking timber a whisper. Poirot sat alone in the study, a single lamp glowing at his elbow as he reviewed his notes. On the desk were 6 folders, each labelled in his exacting hand: Rivington, Trent, Verity, Blakemore, Clarissa, Helena, each with motive, each with something to lose, and one with something still to hide. He was about to close the Verity file when a sharp knock came at the door. Hastings entered, rain-speckled and breathless. "Poirot," he said, "there's been something. You'd best come quickly." Poirot rose without a word. They found her in the Orchid house, Verity Langford, sprawled on the floor beside the centre display pedestal where the black orchid had once stood. Her left arm was flung across her chest, her right hand still gripping a slender gardening trowel as if she had tried to defend herself. There was no blood, no visible injury, but her eyes, open, unblinking, told them enough. Dr. Rivington was summoned at once, but could only confirm what Poirot already knew. "She's dead," he said softly. "It appears to be new. She's dead," he said softly. "It appears to be sudden cardiac failure. But I'd want the body examined properly. There's something off." Poirot looked down at Verity's still form, then around the greenhouse. It was undisturbed. No broken glass, no spilled soil, no overturned pots. Too clean. "Who found her?" he asked. "Clarissa," Hastings said. "She was taking a walk. Couldn't sleep. Said she saw a light in the greenhouse. Alone?" "Yes." Poirot closed his eyes a moment. "And the others?" "Still asleep. Lady Helena has been told. Trent is locked in his room, apparently." Rivington came directly from the guest house. Poirot turned to Dr. Rivington. "Have any chemicals gone missing from your supplies?" Rivington frowned. "Not that I'm aware of, but I can check." Poirot nodded. "Please do. Something precise was used. A poison, most likely. One fast, silent, and untraceable under crude examination." Hastings whispered, "You think she was silenced?" "I know it," Poirot said. "And not for what she did, but for what she knew." Later that morning, as the storm receded into drizzle and grey skies, Poirot gathered the remaining guests once more in the library. Not for the final reveal, but for control. The mood was tighter now. Clarissa sat stiff-backed, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to appear composed. Trent kept checking his watch, his lips pressed into a nervous line. Rivington remained quiet, a man both shocked and strangely hollow. Lady Helena had not yet come down. Poirot stood before the hearth, his tone colder than usual. "Verity Langford is dead," he said without ceremony. "An unnatural death. I shall not waste time with sentiment." No one spoke. "Died last night, after I declared my intention to reveal the truth today. She died not as a random tragedy, but as a response." Clarissa cleared her throat. "She was under great stress. She was silenced, madame," Poirot said sharply. "And not with emotion, but with strategy." Trent looked up. "You're saying the same person who killed Sir Montague has struck again?" "I am saying that the same reason exists," Poirot said, "which is not about malice, but about inheritance, about identity." He turned to them. "There is an heir to the Weatherby name. Sir Montague had uncovered the truth and was poised to announce it. The black orchid was a signal, a symbol. Someone placed it to force a confrontation. Verity knew. And last night she may have tried to act." He paused. "I found something in her effects, a torn envelope from Florence. Inside, a letter fragment signed A.E.W. It was addressed to Verity, and it said only, 'The orchid is yours by right, but they will not give it freely.'" Clarissa inhaled sharply. Trent stood, panic seizing his face. "You're saying Verity knew the heir, that she was helping him?" Poirot nodded once. "Oui. Or perhaps she was the heir." A stunned silence followed. Clarissa whispered, "But she was Montague's niece." Poirot's voice was calm. "The certificate found in Montague's safe listed a child named Arthur Elias Weatherby, born in 1902. But the records from the parish, those I had retrieved this week, list no burial, no later mention. And in the Italian records Verity presented to Florence's Art Institute, She was known not as Langford, but Verity, aliases. Hastings blinked. She was the heir? Poirot nodded. Adopted by Montague's sister, hidden from legal record, she returned not merely for closure, but to reclaim her name. She may have even been blackmailed into silence. Poirot turned his gaze sharply, and someone decided her silence must be eternal. By afternoon, the house was locked down. Inspector Jarrell returned, furious and flustered, and reluctantly handed full authority of the investigation to Poirot. The local coroner confirmed the presence of digitoxin, an extract of the foxglove plant, fast, fatal, traceable only by chemical test. The flower grew in Ravenwell's gardens. Poirot walked them alone, his gloved hands behind his back, lips pressed in concentration. He flipped again. And then there is Lady Helena, a woman who loved her name more than her husband. She knew about Verity's parentage, perhaps even facilitated the adoption. But she was losing control. Her husband was going to undo the order she had so carefully preserved. Poirot tapped the diagram. Verity received the black orchid not as a threat, but as a call. A signal that her time to reclaim her legacy had come. She wrote to the heir, Arthur Elias Weatherby, the true heir. He was ready to come forward. Verity, emboldened, intended to speak at the gathering. Poirot paused, but someone knew she had the letter. Someone read it and struck before she could send another. That afternoon, Poirot requested a final, quiet conversation with Lady Helena in the solarium. She arrived composed as ever, dressed in grey, pearls neat, hands steady. "You asked for me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, madame. I have one question. Why did you press the flower between the pages of your novel?" Her face flickered. I thought it beautiful." "No, you thought it dangerous, because it had bloomed too early, because Verity had seen it." He removed the bloom from his pocket. "You lied about not planting anything in the orchid house. You ordered this flower, cultivated it secretly, and displayed it to send a message. But someone else, someone clever, saw your game and used it." Lady Helena was silent. Poirot continued, voice soft but unrelenting. "You wanted control, but you did not want murder. That was not your crime. Your crime was summoning the ghosts and leaving the door open, and someone very close, walked through." She said nothing. Her silence was confirmation enough. Poirot stood. "Tonight," he said, "I gather them all, and the truth, it will bloom at last." Chapter 8. The final gathering at precisely 8 o'clock. Just as the grandfather clock in the entrance hall struck its first chiming note, the remaining residents and guests of Ravenwell House assembled once more in the grand drawing-room. The storm had passed. The skies beyond the tall windows were starless, black and velvet as morning drapery. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across gilt-framed portraits of long-dead Langfords, who seemed, tonight, to peer down in judgment. Lady Helena sat rigidly upright, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her, Dr. Rivington adjusted his cuffs with unnecessary attention. Mr. Trent had brought his briefcase and held it on his knees like a shield. Clarissa Vale sipped a brandy without speaking, her eyes half-lidded and unreadable. Anthony Blakemore, brought in under supervision but no longer considered a suspect, stood by the door, shifting uncomfortably. Poirot entered last. He did not take a seat. He remained standing, his hands clasped lightly before him, his dark eyes moving from one face to the next. His tone, when he began, was neither dramatic nor loud. It was deliberate, quiet, unmistakably final. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "thank you for joining me. What we have witnessed at Ravenwell is not merely murder. It is legacy warfare. It is an attempt not only to end lives, but to rewrite history. And in doing so, a great mistake was made." He turned slightly, facing the hearth. "When Sir Montague Langford died, it appeared an accident. A shelf collapsed, a man fell. But there was no dirt on his boots, no signs he had been gardening. That alone told me the scene was staged." Poirot stepped aside, revealing a small tray, upon which lay the second black orchid, the one he had found pressed in Lady Helena's notebook. "This flower," he said softly, "was not natural to this region, nor to this greenhouse. It was imported, cultivated, and timed to bloom on the very day of the garden party. That is no coincidence. That is orchestration." He paused, then continued, voice tightening. He stopped by the herbaceous border, where foxglove stalks towered in silence. Someone had picked one recently. He could see the fresh cut. Someone who knew flowers, knew poisons, knew that the black orchid had not ended the story, but only started it. And now, with Verity gone, the murderer was closer to succeeding than ever before. Poirot looked up toward the west wing windows, where shadows passed behind drapes. He whispered, "No more blooms, mon ami. The truth, it is ready to flower." Chapter 7. Poirot's Hidden Clue. The sky remained overcast as Hercule Poirot made his quiet rounds through Ravenwell House, no longer searching, but confirming. The time for interviews had passed. Now he sought the one detail everyone had seen, but no one had understood, the incongruity hidden in plain view. He returned first to the greenhouse. The black orchid was gone now, sealed under glass for forensic examination, but Poirot walked its former pedestal with deliberate care, examining the floor, the arrangement of pots, the wire rack where Montague's body had fallen. He crouched near the side wall, brushing dust from the tile. There it was again, a partial heel print, small, narrow, but distinctive, the same print he had noted on the first day, now more visible due to the softened soil from the recent storm. But it was not Verity's, and certainly not the gardener's. Poirot took out a measuring string and recorded the depth and position. "Someone came here before the party," he murmured, "when no one else was watching, and they returned after Verity was dead." From his coat pocket, Poirot removed a single item. A dried bloom he had found that morning, hidden in a pressed notebook inside Lady Helena's writing desk. A second black orchid, slightly older, slightly paler, clipped at the stem, not plucked, by root. She had said she had no interest in gardening, but this was cut deliberately, for display. And then, with characteristic precision, Poirot returned to the manor and requested an inspection of the household's post. Among the outgoing letters, he found it, a slim international envelope addressed to A. E. Weatherby, Poste Restante, Florence. It was dated 2 days before Verity's death, and it was Lady Helena's handwriting. Back in the study, Poirot sat alone with Hastings, chaise d'Aix, fire unlit, the room still. "She knew," Poirot said simply. "From the beginning." "Lady Helena?" "Yes. The black orchid. It was hers. She ordered it from a private collection abroad, cultivated it secretly in the glass-house under Verity's old name. It was not just a symbol. It was a message to Verity, carefully timed. But why? Guilt. Control. Perhaps an attempt to lure Verity to claim the inheritance formally, or to frighten her into staying silent." Hastings frowned. "And then she killed her." Poirot shook his head. "No. Lady Helena, I believe, set the stage for a psychological battle, but she underestimated how many others were watching. One person feared Verity would expose everything, and struck first." He opened a small notebook and pointed to a diagram. Montague was going to confess. He prepared legal amendments. Trent, the adviser, had everything to lose. But he is not clever enough to forge a flower. He flipped the page. Dr. Rivington had access to chemicals and rare orchid knowledge, but he was too proud to fake a bloom. He believes in purity. He even objected to ethereal use. Another page. Clarissa Vale, observant, informed, but she had no financial stake, no legacy to preserve. It was Lady Helena who ordered the orchid in secret. She alone had access to the garden layout, the greenhouse schedule, and the funds to acquire a specimen so rare. And yet she did not kill her husband. Gasps stirred, but Poirot held up a hand. No, Lady Helena's crime was subtler. She planted the flower not as a threat, but as a summons. She knew the truth about Verity Langford, that she was not simply Montague's niece, but the last of the Weatherby line, adopted quietly by his sister. A legacy hidden, but never forgotten. And when Lady Helena realized Montague intended to bring this secret into the open, she panicked, not by stopping him, but by attempting to control the moment of truth. He turned to Lady Helena. "You sent the black orchid as a signal, a message to Verity. Now is your time." Helena said nothing, but her mouth was a line of stone. Poirot's gaze swept across the room. But someone else intercepted that message, someone who realized that Verity's emergence would destroy their position, financially, socially, irrevocably. Poirot stepped forward, standing now before Lionel Trent. "Monsieur Trent, you advised Montague through the estate's turbulent years. You guided the sales of heirlooms, the reallocation of trusts. But you also stood to benefit from prolonged ambiguity. A sealed estate, a contested inheritance. With Montague gone and Verity disinherited, you could extend your control." Trent's voice cracked as he stood. "That's ridiculous. I acted within legal bounds, and not even in the will." Poirot raised a brow. "Not in this will, but you were mentioned in a draft Montague was preparing to void, and Verity's letter to the real heir. It would have exposed your mismanagement. You had motive." Poirot turned then slowly and faced the final chair. "Yet it was not you." A pause. "It was Dr. Malcolm Rivington." Gasps rippled again. Rivington straightened, blinking. "That is absurd. I am a scientist, a guest." "You are also a man with access to digitoxin, a man who objected to the use of artificial hormones, who believed in purity, yet tolerated the presence of a manufactured bloom in a greenhouse you had carefully helped design. No, the contradiction was too loud. Poirot stepped closer. You recognize the orchid as a symbol, a challenge to your authority, and you realized, too late, that Verity was more than an interloper. She was a bloodline reborn. She would inherit Ravenwell, and your project, your reputation, would be reduced to footnotes. Poirot's voice grew quiet. So you acted, first by watching, then by ensuring Montague's death appeared accidental. You nudged the shelf. You left no prints. You let the orchid distract. But when Verity survived your machinations, when she began to speak to others, you poisoned her, digitoxin in a single cup of water, silent, swift, and final. Dr. Rivington stood now, trembling, his voice hoarse. She had no right to take it, to wear a name she didn't earn. Ah, Poirot said softly, but you did not own it either. You were a guest, a gardener of borrowed soil. Silence fell, then footsteps. Inspector Jarrell stepped forward from the hall, 2 constables at his side. Dr. Rivington made no move to resist, only lowered his head as they led him out. Poirot turned once more to the room. A black orchid blooms only under pressure. Heat, darkness, precision. It does not survive when forced. Neither, I think, do secrets. He bowed slightly, and with that, the mystery of the black orchid was complete. Chapter 9. Outcome and Justice. Dr. Rivington offered no resistance. He walked between the constables like a man descending from a great height, eyes unfocused, breath tight in his chest. There were no final words, no impassioned denials, only silence. Poirot watched from the drawing-room window as the police car rolled down the gravel path of Ravenwell House and disappeared behind the hedgerows. The truth had bloomed. Now came the withering. Inspector Jarrell lingered long enough to offer polite acknowledgments, though his discomfort was evident. Poirot's investigation had outpaced the official one, and in the inspector's eyes that was both impressive and humiliating. "Well, then," he muttered to Hastings near the door, "a man like that, Rivington, seemed too intelligent for this sort of mess. But intelligence doesn't rule out madness, I suppose." "No, monsieur," Poirot interjected gently. "But it is not madness that led to this. It was ego, and the fear of being made irrelevant. Some men would rather destroy a legacy than see it inherited by another." Jarrell left without further comment. The rest of the house had entered a strange limbo. Lady Helena remained in her rooms, declining visitors and meals, the weight of her unspoken guilt pressing her into isolation. She had not killed, but she had lit the match. Poirot doubted she would ever fully forgive herself for summoning ghosts she could no longer control. Clarissa Vale, on the other hand, had found fresh inspiration. Poirot spotted her in the morning, seated on the terrace with a leather-bound notebook scribbling furiously. "The Orchid murders," she murmured with a faraway smile. "Or perhaps petals of poison. What do you think?" Poirot gave a small, polite shrug. "Both melodramatic, madame. But alas, that sells." Anthony Blakemore, the young gardener, had been cleared of all suspicion. Poirot spoke with him briefly. On the morning of his departure, "You have talent," Poirot said kindly. "But remember, young man, plants respond not only to touch, but to presence. Tend your to touch, but to presence. Tend your soil wisely." Anthony flushed, nodded, and left Ravenwell behind. As for Lionel Trent, he remained, albeit stripped of authority. The solicitor who arrived from London, summoned by Lady Helena's barrister, had already begun combing through the estate's finances. There would be questions, audits, perhaps charges of a lesser kind. But his threat had been neutralized. The real twist, Poirot knew, had not been in the murders, but in the restoration that followed. Verity Langford's rightful status had been confirmed through legal correspondence and cross-referenced birth records. Though she was gone, her identity could not be erased again. The letter she had written to Arthur Elias Weatherby, the true heir, had been postmarked, sent, not destroyed. Poirot had ensured it. He would receive it. And when he did, he would return. The Weatherby name would rise again, not through scandal, but through survival. Poirot and Hastings prepared to leave 2 days later. Their bags were packed, their cases closed. The morning was crisp, the air laced with damp earth and distant honeysuckle. As the car pulled onto the village road, Hastings turned from the window. "I still can't understand how Rivington thought he'd get away with it. If Verity had lived, she would have told everyone." "Ah," Poirot said, "but that is the nature of such men. They believe the cleverest crime is one that never needs to be hidden, because no one will believe it possible in the first place." Hastings frowned, but he was respected. "Precisely," said Poirot. "Respected, trusted. It is the most convenient disguise." They passed the outer wall of the estate, where ivy curled like a sleeping cat around ancient stones. Hastings sighed. "Will you miss it, Ravenwell?" Poirot tilted his head. "No, it is a beautiful place, yes, but beauty is often the mask beneath which danger hides. And yet—" He paused, watching the trees drift past. "I shall remember the Orchid." "The black one?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No, the second one, hidden, pressed between pages, dried but not dead. It told the truth long before the murderer did." Hastings blinked. "It did?" Poirot nodded. "Mais oui. Even a withered flower, mon ami, can be a witness. One only has to know how to listen." Chapter 10. The Last Bloom. The train to London hummed steadily as it pulled away from Wiltshire, its windows misted by a soft rain that blurred the countryside into watercolour. Inside the first-class carriage, Hercule Poirot sat immaculately composed, his gloved hands resting atop a small leather case that contained, among other things, a single, carefully pressed orchid bloom. Across from him, Captain Hastings leaned back with a sigh, scanning the countryside as it slipped past. "Well," he said, "I must say, Poirot, that was a rather grim affair. 2 deaths, 3 ruined reputations, and enough family secrets to fill a 3-volume novel." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "It is true, Hastings, that this case was not elegant in its crime. No locked room, no clever cipher, but it was, in its way, the most dangerous kind of murder. A crime of control. A desire not to kill in anger, but to preserve illusion. To protect one's place in a world that was changing too fast. Hastings folded his arms. Still don't understand how you spotted Rivington. The man seemed so cold, so clinical. That was precisely why, Poirot said. He was too untouched. Everyone else, Lady Helena, Verity, even Clarissa, had moments of hesitation, of emotion. Rivington, nothing, not even curiosity. A man so fascinated by orchids, yet who barely inquired about the murder's central flower, now that you mention it. And consider this, Poirot continued. He was the only one who could have administered digitoxin with precision. He had the knowledge, the access, and the motive, though it was hidden beneath professional envy. Verity's claim threatened not only the inheritance, but the Orchid house itself, the very project he had helped shape. Hastings shook his head. Still a wretched thing to do. Poirot glanced out the window. Ah, mais oui. But often, Hastings, it is not hatred that drives a killer. It is fear. The fear of being made obsolete, of watching one's carefully constructed world collapse under truth. There was a pause. Then Hastings leaned forward. You never told me. The letter Verity sent. Did it reach Arthur Elias Weatherby? Poirot gave a small smile. Mais naturellement. I ensured it was hand-delivered before we left. And do you think he'll come? Poirot's gaze drifted to the raindrops racing down the glass. He will not need to. Verity named him in a supplementary note. The estate, though diminished, will pass to him. But more importantly, the truth is no longer buried. It has taken root. Hastings frowned. Rather poetic, don't you think? Poirot gave a modest shrug. Even in death, mon ami, there are blooms of justice. He adjusted his cuffs. And besides, we must not forget, he added with a glint of satisfaction, that all murderers make one mistake, Hastings. Oh? They think only of how to kill, not of how it will look when the flower is left behind. Hastings chuckled. And what will you do next, Poirot? Poirot straightened his tie and leaned back. Rest, reflect, and perhaps tend to my own orchids. They do not lie, you see. They bloom only when ready, unlike people. The countryside continued its passage. The fields grew distant, and Ravenwell House, its shadows, its silences, its black orchid, was behind them now, fading like the scent of a flower long picked. But Poirot, ever precise, ever vigilant, had left it with everything in its place, even the truth.